Our panelists are in the audience. We've got Linda Kozlowski, COO of Etsy, with us. Trying to remember where everyone is. Laura Weedman-Powers, Code 2040, CEO and co-founder. John Sposato, GeekWire and PicMonkey, also was on the very first Xbox team, so he can give us a little bit of history. Leanne Meyer over there, she's working on these issues really hard at Carnegie Mellon, and Adam Miller in front of me, CEO of Cornerstone On Demand, sells HR software to big technology companies. So as Adam said, we want you to participate. We want you to jump in, be obvious. There's mics roving around the room. If you want to raise your hand, don't wait for me to ask for questions. Just raise your hand and we'll send a mic over to you. And we're really focused today on solutions. So our job will be done if you can walk out of here with 3 things that you or your company can do. So take notes. We did this survey with SurveyMonkey, and I want to bring the numbers up on the screen. And most of the trends, not too surprising. The one thing that did stand out was a difference in perspective. If you look at general US workers, 50-50, people think there are still barriers facing women in the workplace. 50% don't think that. But when it comes to technology, 66% of women believe there are still barriers facing them. In Silicon Valley, only 38% of men do. So half as many men as women believe this is a problem. So my first question is, are we living in 2 different realities? And Laura, I'm going to start with you.
In short, I'd say sort of yes. I mean, it's one reality in that we're all showing up at the same workplaces and experiencing the same environment, the same culture, operating under the same policies. But there's clearly a differential impact in the way that these policies and procedures are affecting folks from different backgrounds. And I think looking at this data is a great illustration of this. We hear, particularly in the news these days, a lot of anecdotes about experiences that folks have had, which helps round out sort of the color of what it feels like to be a woman in tech. But I think data like this that actually shows that it's not just those people who are courageous enough to speak up to the media, but it's actually a pervasive experience of what it feels like to show up at your workplace, is important for all leadership to take note of, because you don't have a different set of policies for men and women, and yet there are vast differential impacts depending on your gender, your race, your backgrounds when you show up at the workplace.
Linda, what's your take on this? Because if there's this big of a difference in whether people even believe it's in a problem, how can you actually make progress?
Well, I think that's actually part of the root of the problem, is this lack of understanding that there's something out there that needs to be addressed, because the only way it can be addressed is in a very intentional way. So just waiting for the pipeline to get better, which is the constant source of like, oh, well, if just more women would apply, or if more people of different races would apply, then we'd be fine, is really sort of burying your head in the sand and not thinking about what's really at issue here. So it's the intentionality that needs to happen, but if you don't believe there's actually a problem, then the intentionality can't be addressed either with tools or with systems.
And Laura, quickly, you have some numbers on the pipeline. Tell us how the pipeline's actually reflected.
Yeah, I mean, what's really fascinating is we often hear this narrative of like, well, the talented women or talented people of color aren't out there. And if you look at tech graduates, we're all tech companies here for the most part, it's actually about 20% of tech grads, computer science grads each year are women. About 20% are Black and Latino. And yet you don't see that represented in the tech workforce. And if you take a step back and look at the workforce overall, college grads is pretty much 50-50 these days between women and men. And so there really is no excuse when you're looking at your workforce as a whole as to who's out there qualified for these sorts of roles. And the idea that we need to lower the bar to get more diversity is false and frankly offensive.
Adam, I realize it takes courage for a man to speak out on these issues. You feel like you're walking into a minefield. So thank you, Adam and John, for agreeing to join us today. I could look at these numbers and say, why don't men get it? Why don't men think this is a problem?
Well, I think the typical excuse is, especially for tech companies, is we're a meritocracy, we're going to hire the best people, period. That is typically what you'll hear. And the reality is there's unconscious bias in all of these organizations. And we could talk later about tools, But you could have all the tools you want, all the training you want, and if you don't have a directive from the top, a demand to have diversity, it's not going to happen. Because until you have managers hiring people for diversity, and you have diverse managers who naturally hire a diverse team, you are not going to break the chain. And that's just the reality.
Now, Leanne, you guys are working with students. You're working at people mid-career. And I'm curious what you're seeing, because you sort of see the pipeline going into the industry.
Well, I think, first of all, we're excited. Our computer science students and engineering students have hit parity on campus. So we're at 50-50. So the pipeline,
Can we get some
we're proud of
applause for that?
Yeah,
Yes, thank you.
But I think what we're seeing in companies is that I think the fashion of trying to address it at the moment is this focus on unconscious bias training. And our research is really showing that's not being successful in building diverse or inclusive environments. We see a backlash. We see people feeling forced to do things that they're not comfortable doing. We see people believing they're suddenly de-biased in a 90-minute workshop and now it's all gone. Or we hear a lot of people talking about the fact that, we're all biased because we don't want to name and shame, so all bias training keeps talking to the fact that we're biased, and so we don't see behavior change. And so that's what we're seeing a lot of, a real interest to address this in the market with unconscious bias training, where the data shows us unconscious bias training is not the way to go.
So should companies not do unconscious bias training at all?
I think unconscious bias training is helpful for creating awareness. I think the focus on companies should be what we would say is de-bias your systems, not try and de-bias people. Biases come from years of socialization and reward, and to keep that top of mind in how busy everyone's environments are is complicated. So I think it's looking at how do you recruit, which campuses you come to, what does your pay-for-performance system look like, looking at your processes, your systems, and taking the bias out of those more than trying to de-bias people.
Go ahead.
Now, Emily, you told me earlier on that it's good to have a little controversy and disagreement, so here goes. I actually respectfully disagree with that. Now, not having seen how that unbiased training gets packaged up, even the term I cringe a little bit at, and I can be sympathetic to people who feel like that's not something that they want to do when they show up to work. The reason why I disagree is because I think a lot of the conversation so far on gender balance has focused on how do we train women to talk differently? How do we teach women to pitch better to VCs? How do we teach women to sound more assertive in the boardroom? And I actually think that that's kind of bullshit, because I actually think it's time that we train men to listen better, right? And I'm going back to like a lot of fundamental ways in which how boys and girls develop fundamentally and how they communicate, what they kind of index towards. So all too often, as a CEO, as a board member, I see a very, very capable female executive who's got all the chops. And in the boardroom, she might say things, use language that's a little bit more inclusive, because that's who she is. Or maybe in the language are words that are bids for affirmation, right? In an effort to, because women are a little bit more, their leadership style is more inclusive, more about consensus. Hey, I have this idea, do you all agree? Let me bid for some affirmation. Oftentimes to male ears, and especially if we fundamentally define notions of leadership, what a CEO looks like, what a CEO sounds like, if we define those things as being these kind of conventionally male attributes, then that woman is at a huge disadvantage. And so I would posit that actually we need to perhaps we don't call it unbiased training, but I do think that we should talk about how men can listen better.
Has anyone in the audience had experience with this unconscious bias training working or not working? Blake?
Yes.
You're right in front of me.
Yes, sir. I am.
Yes. Hello.
So we actually got the Clayman Institute, who's associated with Stanford Research, and had them actually go through a calibration of my senior leadership team as we calibrated 100 of our top people. We did it 3 years in a row. They've calibrated this year, just in June, calibrated the year before that, the year before that. They also went through unconscious bias training, and you have to do it over and over again because I think to that woman's point over there, Leanne's point, that if you train once, people think they're cured. They're cured. God, I've seen the light, and now I'm better. And it turns out, to her point, you have to do it repeatedly, so you have to train every year, and then you have to change the language used in your processes, the way that you write performance reviews, what language you use that says this is what defines good, this is what defines mediocre, this is what defines needs improvement, And you have to actually make the words you use, because language is culture, you have to make those words actually, as Jonathan was saying, you have to make them more sensitive and more confirming of females and gender, because we're different. And if you don't train men to hear differently and do it repeatedly over and over again, it's not going to get fixed.
Over there.
Hi, Tom Soto. I'm with Frontier Impact Capital. I'm old enough to have been involved with a couple of civil rights movements. I'm also chair of the New America Alliance. And this is an organization that 17 years ago, when we were knocking on the doors as investors of CalPERS and CalSTRS and New York Common, we would have a collective of maybe $400 million between us. We were not allowed in those doors. And frankly, CalSTRS had no Hispanic fund manager. CalPERS had one, Hilda Ochoa out of Washington, D.C. And there's a lot of parallels that I see, including terms. However you want to call it, I think if you went to a Latino conference and suggested, that type of bias, you get laughed out of the room. To us, it's called racism. And the way that you are able to reform and embrace an ethic of inclusion is by ensuring that your board is diverse, gender, racial, that your comp structure is, your ownership stack, and that your ethic in terms of how you're marketing and putting yourself out to market. We've seen this phenomena, of course, in Silicon Valley. I'm a tech investor. I co-invest with a great number of colleagues from the Valley. In my area, we have Silicon Beach. And for those of you that observe this discussion, you see that Silicon Beach looks very different. And that march has gone east toward downtown LA. Some of you have seen that. Now the Arts District, where the LA Clean Tech Incubator is. And now in East LA, where I have my offices, which we call the Silicon Barrio. But it's going to be the difference between being investors, being a board member, being a CEO, and being a leader, which means that you're going to have to dedicate a certain amount of hours per day. It is a real issue that requires real time, real commitment, and a demand of change at the highest level within that organization, whether it's a fund, a VC, or an operator.
Agreed.
Other than that, it's not going to happen. My final point is this. If you don't do it, you will be told to do it, because a lot of our companies want to go public, and the public equity governance structure does not allow for any of that insensitivity to proliferate inside these public companies, thus CalPERS and CalSTRS demanding more gender and racial balance at the executive level. So I just wanted to highlight that point, that this is not a new frontier for many of us. This is an old frontier. This just happens to be the current frontier for discrimination and the need for inclusion. It might sound like it's a pain in the ass for a lot of people and just another thing. It's not. It means an entirely large universe of difference for folks who are investing and committed to this space, but want to see the tide of economics lift for all the communities. We've seen 3 great waves of wealth hit, and we could point to many 30-year-old billionaires, but I look out my window in East LA and it looks exactly the same as it did in 1972. Right. That could change by having this conversation elevated to a practical implementation.
I think
Over here.
Hi, my name is Bonnie Simi, and I run JetBlue Technology Ventures, which, by the way, is 50-for-50, male-female on my team. But you had mentioned you wanted something actionable coming out of today. In my prior role, I was head of talent for JetBlue, and over the course of 5 years, we created a policy where every slate for an officer or director position had to have a diverse slate. And it's amazing what an impact that does. Because often the hiring managers have already decided who they want to hire, which usually, it's human nature, might be someone in their own likeness. But when you say the slate has to be a diverse slate, the HR or the people team will go out and find amazing candidates, and lo and behold, perhaps that diverse candidate might actually be better than the one that was originally slated for it. And over the course of 5 years, the officer and director corps at JetBlue now has become immensely more diverse simply because of that one thing. So if you take that one action item away, that might help build out some diversity within your leadership group.
Go for it.
I think the combination of these two things is really important. The idea of unconscious bias training on its own is not enough, and this idea of like I'm cured and that's it. But it really is about what the organization actually exemplifies and looks like from the top. So Etsy is 58% women employees. More than half of our managers are women. 5 out of our 8 leaders, executive team, are women. And most importantly, as far as I'm aware, we're the only gender diverse board or the gender split board in a public tech company. So, and that didn't come easily. That was something that actually required a lot of time and a lot of effort to make sure that that would happen. And we still don't think that we're actually done yet. There's more that we need to do in engineering. There's more that we need to do in working with race and equality around those particular areas. But people hire people that look like them, no matter who they are.
Right.
So the only answer to this in combining something around unconscious bias is actually forcing and making sure that you're seeing a diverse pool of candidates and that your entry-level class mimics those statistics we just heard from what it actually looks like in the colleges and universities and who's graduating, and making sure that those people are in place so that the environment itself is as inclusive as possible.
I'm so glad there's no shortage of people who want to talk, but there are some people in the audience I want to get to. Anne-Marie Slaughter, are you here? Where are you? I thought she was here. Jeff Wilkie. So as a, obviously, enormous technology company, I'm curious, and I'm sure there's a very long answer to this question, but how do you tackle this issue when you are as big as Amazon?
Well, we've talked about technology and the pipeline in this conversation, and that's a key part of the focus for us. We're heavily involved in organizations that are trying to make sure that we have diverse classrooms in middle school and high school, in college. I'm on the board of Code.org, and I joined that organization especially because its focus has been on public high schools in the US, making sure that every public high school has a computer science curriculum. And what that leads to is 37% of the people taking the AP computer science class are underrepresented minorities, and almost 50% are women. So the problem is, of course, that pipeline is long, and we have to do a lot. I love the comment about having balanced slates right off the bat right now. That's something we can do right now. And then we have to keep working to make sure that we build a pipeline that's diverse.
And luckily, Anne-Marie just walked in next to you. And so,
I was watching.
I wanted to ask you this question. You know, you've taken on this issue of policies and benefits. Silicon Valley, in some ways, offers the best benefits in the world. On the other hand, you could look at some of these benefits as having a dark side, like late dinners or all of these things that make you never want to leave work. And I'm curious what your take is on those and how they affect women in the workplace.
So I would say how they affect anyone who's a caregiver, and a growing number of men. But so a couple things. The policies are great to the extent senior men take them. If we're talking around maternity or parental leave, then the senior men have to take them. Otherwise, they're for the weak track, and ambitious women won't take them. So you have to make it the default. And if you really want to change it, the men have to take it, and the men who do take them have to be praised as serious parents, serious workers, all-round people. The campus problem, I find a huge issue. Having been in the academy for 20 years, campuses are great for 18 to 22-year-olds, 18 to 30-year-olds, maybe 22 to 35-year-olds. But once you start actually having a family, then you need to be able to work in multiple different places, and you definitely need to be in meetings a lot of the time. I don't believe in all distributed work from home, but I think the idea that you're really going to keep your top talent through family years if you have to all be on a campus, it's not going to work.
I want to take a slightly different turn for a second. I want to see a show of hands. How many people were surprised by the revelations about sexual harassment in the tech industry over the last 3 weeks? Raise your hand. Are you surprised? Be honest, please. Okay. How many people weren't surprised at all? Okay. So Ninian Wang is in the audience. I see you. And Ninian was the very first woman to agree to come forward to speak about her experience with Justin Callback. And for those of you who don't know, Ninian worked very hard to convince other women to come forward as well and get them comfortable with it. And I know Ninian's going to be speaking tomorrow, so please listen to that. But I know you've been thinking a lot about how we changed things in retrospect.
Oh, yes. Okay. I think that people are very focused on courage and bravery, and I've heard so many people say that must have been taken a lot of courage. So there was courage involved, but there was also a lot of hard work before and afterwards. I think of it as just like work. You have a goal. In this case, my goal was to get a predator out of a position of power. And then there are steps that you would do to achieve that goal. Evidence, creating a timeline, a pattern, establishing enough logical evidence that when anyone looks at it, they will reach the same conclusion. And we did the article, and then we did a lot of work to contact LPs. I asked the other accusers to contact LPs. We got contacted by more accusers, who I then connected to the reporters. So we actually did I think I did 100 hours of work before and after the article. And people keep saying, why is this time different? And I do think the macro climate plays into it, but also the amount of work that we did also affected things.
You also have an interesting idea about how we move forward. Like, what's a solution to that? How do we make sure this doesn't happen to more women?
Oh, well, there are a lot of things that I think we should do. I think that the long-term solution that people have said is that in hyper-masculine situations, such as police forces, military, that harassment will gradually occur. So the long-term solution is actually to get more diversity, as people have discussed. I think in a shorter term, having a place where people can report harassment is very important. So I have heard many founders say to me, I've been harassed by multiple investors, but I have to keep working in the tech industry. But I've never heard anyone say, I've been groped by multiple doctors, but I have to keep going to the hospital. And that is another situation where there's a person in a position of authority and a person in a very vulnerable situation, but there is not harassment. So I think we can learn from the medical industry. They have a medical board. If someone is harassed, they can immediately call that number, and it does not take 10 years of concerted effort to expose a doctor who's been harassing people. So I think that there's a lot we can learn from that situation. If there's a third-party, independent person who can investigate claims and make recommendations, that's much better than what's happening right now, where the third party is journalists. There's no place to report harassment of investors, so people have to go to the press. And that's bad for everyone involved, because week after week there are bad headlines, and the women have to relive their harassment in public. So if there were a third party that you can actually call, who will investigate and recommend solutions, I think that that would go a long way.
Is Katie Benner here? Hi. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the media, because, you know, I was chasing this story, Katie was chasing this story, Fortune was chasing this story for a very long time, and it was a very difficult story to do because you have to convince women to come forward. And I'm curious, Katie reported, had a great story in the New York Times where she moved this story forward, and I'm curious, Katie, what the experience of doing that was like for you.
So one of the interesting things about it is that the follow-up story that I did was in some ways easier to do than the story just about Justin Callback, because the silence had been broken. And I think that people really underestimated how powerful it is to break the silence. So in the couple of weeks since that story, I've gotten a lot of pushback from investors and people I really like saying, the problem with what you did is that now there's going to be a witch hunt, and none of these men will meet with women anymore because it's too dangerous for them. They have to cut women out of the process, essentially, because now you've created an environment where no man can comfortably get a drink with a woman. Now, that's very, oh, sorry, they want me to move into the light. That seems a little bit Mike Pence-y to me, so I don't love that as an idea. But the reality of the situation is that the opposite is true. And what I keep asking these men, and even some of the women who've said the same thing, is by being silent and protecting all of these guys, did you get to parity? Did you get the job you wanted? Did you get the CEO spot you deserved? Did you get funding? Because if the answer is yes, then you're right. Keep it all a secret. But if the answer is no, and I think like less than 5% of GPs are women, seems like a small number, not a lot of women are getting funding. I have a friend who's an angel investor who told me that of his portfolio, the women-led companies that fail, it's because they don't get follow-on funding, not because they are bad companies. These are really, really drastic things. And apparently keeping things a secret, oh my God.
Please, we want to see you. We want to see you.
And apparently keeping things a secret didn't change the system. So I think that one of the things we're going to see the press do is try to continue to look at the story from a variety of angles, not just these are bad people who did bad things. Because I think we're also already seeing VC firms take action within their own firms. There have been 2 angelists, and I forgot the other one, who've said we've done an internal investigation and we think something has gone wrong. So I don't think, I think that process has begun. I think for the press, it's also what are the structural issues that allow harassment to persist? Why can't LPs and potential employees and potential portfolio companies make the best decisions possible? Well, they don't have all the information they need. So I do think the story will continue, and I apologize to anybody who feels that they can never meet with a woman.
So you raise an interesting point that sexual harassment in the industry is one thing, creating an inclusive and diverse workforce is another thing. They are related, but they are different. And Laura, I know you have an observation about this, about the kinds of women coming forward.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to look at some of the patterns that we're seeing in the women who are coming forward. A disproportionate, compared to numbers in the industry, a disproportionate number of these women are women of color, which is an interesting commentary on really the extent of the power imbalance and who are selected to be preyed upon, frankly, in the industry. And I think also listening to this, I would encourage folks to recognize that really a lot of what's being described here is a tax on women for participating in the industry that can be quite devastating. And it can either show up in dealing with being harassed in your workplace or in funding conversations. It can show up in feeling the need to remove yourself from certain situations that would be comfortable for a man and may lead to a business opportunity. It can show up in speaking up and the impact that that has on your career. And so this is much more systemic than just sort of the folks who are coming forward, but even folks who perhaps haven't been harassed but know that they need to protect themselves from those situations. This idea that men are going to stop having drinks or dinner with women when that's where a huge amount of business takes place is a tax on women participating in the industry. So I think we really need to understand how this depresses the participation and the success at a systemic level and is not just about individual experiences.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I want to respond to a couple of things.
Right.
As an angel investor, I too see an incredible pipeline of women pitching amazing businesses, and they're just not getting funding at the same rate. So that's absolutely happening. I actually want to respond to the earlier metaphor about civil rights. And Ninian Wang and I have actually known each other for a very long time, for many years, and she and I had this conversation, and she gets credit for this idea. There's one fundamental difference when we compare what's happening now to the civil rights movement, or more recently to the LGBT same-sex marriage movement, and that is, and this is a thing, and I'm going to potentially make some of the people in the room a little uncomfortable, but we're all friends, and I'm going to go there, and we can debate it because this is town hall, and that is this thing that I've heard from so many successful women who are CEOs, women who are founders, women who are venture capitalists. And that is this aspect that women don't always support each other, okay? So that's the difference. In civil rights, blacks coalesced. African Americans, they hung together. They would look at like who's getting this job, let's go after that. LGBT movement, same thing, but there's something going on that I think it happens, it clumps in certain areas. I think it's an uneven thing. It's a generalized statement that I'm saying, but
right.
Yeah.
John, I think it's an interesting point, which is what can women do? You have some people behind you who are calling bullshit.
Okay.
And so I want to give them a chance to speak.
Yeah, let's do it.
All Sorry. Yeah, no, I have to. Yeah, I was literally bullshit. I do think there's a generational component, and what's super exciting about, Krista Quarles, CEO of Open Table. There is definitely a generational component. I'm gonna calm myself down. I'm boiling here.
Almost 10 minutes.
I had a chance to meet Gloria Steinem, and one of the questions I asked her was, how did you do it? Because in your day, there was just one woman. And when there's one woman, then it does become a competitive environment. But that's 65, 70-year-old women. I would say in Silicon Valley today, there's a sisterhood of women who are supporting each other, telling each other about board opportunities, giving each other business ideas. There's a sisterhood. But I'm Gen X. I would say what you see from the millennial population is the most exciting of all. Like I am seeing these young women come up, rise up. I think that what you did. When I look at, I worked in Wall Street for 20 years. Talk about sexual harassment. I have been, you name it, it has happened to me. And I think that what is happening now is that you're all on notice. This stuff can't happen anymore. It has to stop. And we are absolutely supportive of one another. So I call now I do think that there's a generational component. So if you're referencing 75, 80-year-old women, sure, no more.
All right. We've got people who've been standing for a while, so I'm going to go over there. Cattle.
Yeah, my name is Alberto Yepes. I'm co-founder of a new venture fund in cybersecurity, Hispanic, obviously, by my name. But I guess simple advice for everybody: how can you make an impact? I spent 10 years at Apple at the beginning of my career, and diversity was something that was something I never thought about it. We always wanted to get the best people in the industry. I think that the key to success is engagement. Let me tell you what it is. So you need to care about the subject, whether you're women, diverse, or not non-diverse, and trying to support that. I think we need to get engagement. We need to get not only mentorship, but a sponsorship. If you want people to come to work for your company, you need to create success. And people see somebody that is diverse and is actually in a position of power because somebody made an impact in your career. I think what we need to do. So each one of us can walk away today and saying, what can I make an impact? You need to engage. I'm chairman of a group called the Hispanic IT Executive Council. Didn't address the Nashimba, the SHIP. This is executives that are wanting to sit on boards, people that want to get into the executive suite. We have about 400 members, CIOs, Facebook, chief security officers for Comcast, very successful people. At the beginning, they were reluctant to get engaged. Why? Because saying, my personal brand, I'm different, I need to be better, way better to get to where I need to be. But we coalesce, it wasn't a sisterhood, it is a community because it's men and women working together. But if you care about it, you need to do that. And what do? It's a push up and pull up. We go to the emerging leaders that are coming up, and we create programs to do that. But it takes time. I'm a VC. I'm in 8 different boards, but every quarter we have these events to be able to do that. So if you really care about the subject, create success, engage, mentor, and sponsor. Create one success, that person's life has been changed, and they will impact somebody else. Thank you.
So Penny Pritzker, former U.S. Commerce Secretary, I'm curious to know, your experience having worked in Washington and how it compares to Silicon Valley, at least the Washington that you worked in. And then, since Krista mentioned the point about Wall Street, we actually have Nicole Farb. If you're in here, I want you to speak next.
So 2 stories, not necessarily from the tech world, as you said. First, I want to tell a real estate story. 7 or 8 years ago, a friend of mine and I decided to start a real estate private equity firm. She had 25 years of experience. I had 25 years of experience. We went out to raise money, and we got no emerging manager money, none. We got money from people who knew us and our experience, but we got none of the money that's supposed to help get women and minorities into our business. And we were the first woman-owned real estate private equity firm out of the 660 that exist. It was crazy. So then we turned it into a business opportunity, and this is an idea for a number of you in this field, is We turned around and ultimately have raised over $1 billion that we put into emerging managers on behalf of institutions. So there's a business opportunity, I think, here for some of the women and minorities who have been successful to take a page and repeat it in the tech world. Second is in government, which is the question you asked me. How many rooms have I gone into in my 30 years of career where I'm the only woman, or there's 2 women, or there's 3 women at most? In government, it was, and in the Obama administration, I think in the leadership, we were 40 to 50% women. There were no gender issues. It was about ideas. And there is something to the percentage. It can't be 1 or 2. It has to be, it's not about color, it's not about gender, it's not about background. It's about the best ideas. And that attitude and that demand that that's the organization you have started at the top. And I would just say for all of us who are running companies, this starts at the top, and we have to insist that the people doing the hiring in our organization are delivering us a diverse organization.
Is Nicole here? Nicole? Okay, so Nicole worked at Goldman Sachs. She was a tech banker, and now she's an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. And Nicole, I would like you to tell us how you think that Silicon Valley compares to banking and Wall Street when it comes to this issue.
I think they're failing. Emily asked me yesterday whether I thought Wall Street or Silicon Valley was more progressive, and I think Wall Street is, and I think that's sad. For all the reasons that I love technology and I'm a founder, we're innovative, we move fast, we're not doing anything as it relates to the topic of diversity. And if you look, 62% of venture firms don't have a single female GP. There's not an investment bank that has that stat. In my own investment bank, Goldman, 17% of managing directors were women. Most firms have 0. And as quickly as a venture firm could move on this topic, like, we're not, right? And I think it's sad.
What are some of the questions that you got asked when you were fundraising?
Am I going to have kids?
Not to put you on the spot.
Real diligence questions. Am I going to have kids? I mean, maybe you're asking if I understand the return dynamic and what it takes, or if I know how to prioritize my business and these kinds of things. But like, am I going to have kids? Am I going to have more kids? Yeah, I'm going to have 10 of them. And that's okay, because I also know how to deliver you a return. Am I going to turn this into a lifestyle business? My favorite is, my wife will understand this, yeah, I don't.
That's right, yeah.
Oh, because I drive revenue, and I have LTV, and this is CAC. Your wife is better equipped to drive into my model, so then why isn't she a general partner? Anyway, those are 3 of my favorites.
I'm getting the wrap signal, and so obviously we could talk about this for hours, decades. My last question, if anyone wants to answer, who needs to change the most? Is it VCs? Is it LPs? Is it CEOs? Is it everyone? I mean, who do we think needs to change?
I'll take that one. So
Adam,
I think without
our brave soul.
I think without a doubt it's the CEOs, because at the end of the day, a lot of the VC firms have partnerships based on people that were successful in business. And the way you're going to get successful leaders in business that are diverse is by having successful leaders in business that are diverse. And the only way that's going to happen is if the top demands it. And so we need people that are willing to demand that there's diversity in these organizations, or it's not going to happen. And we build tools that leverage people analytics and big data machine learning to take out bias, take out racism, to try to get more diverse pools of candidates, be fair about compensation, be fair about talent mobility and succession planning. But at the end of the day, that can only go so far. At the end of the day, it has to be a directive from the top to have diversity in the organization.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you everyone for participating. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone. Continue the conversation outside and online, and thank you everybody for sharing today. I appreciate it.